As a cybersecurity expert, you need to be aware of the latest threats, and this is where threat intelligence comes into play. One reason this is important is because we need to be aware of what's happening so that we can prevent it from happening to our systems, so protect our assets. It can also help us do things like reduce incident response time. If we have a sense of some kind of a threat and what it can do, what kind of an impact it can have on assets, we can then come up with an incident response plan proactively, and so that when it does occur, we can contain it much quicker. So often what will happen when we look at threat intelligence sources, it won't always just say, this is the end result, this is the impact. Often, depending on the threat intelligence source, it'll step through how attacks actually occur, so that we can look at all of the levels involved in that attack and apply security controls along the way. So there is a term in cybersecurity, it's called adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures, otherwise called TTP. And this is exactly what we just described, going step by step through all of the methods used by attackers to gain access to a system or perhaps to crash it, whatever their goal is. So the other thing that we should be able to think about is tools that will give us a graphical representation of something relevant related to threats, like a live geographical map that gives us a sense of where malware threats are currently active. Let's take a look at that. There are plenty of tools like this out on the internet. What we are looking at is the activity for virus software out on the internet. And what's interesting about this is we get a sense not only of where it is geographically, but as we go further down, we can start viewing some additional details. So besides the countries, if I start clicking at the very bottom, we can see the type of sectors that are being affected by these attacks, whether they're in the education sector, government, and so on. If we keep drilling down a little bit further, we can see the nature of the malware. Is it a botnet? Is it a collection of infected machines targeting another individual server or network? And if we go even a little bit further, we can get a sense with the graph of the number of daily attacks. So when cybersecurity people talk about the fact that there are attacks continuously against government agencies and so on, it's true, it actually is happening. You can gain threat intelligence through closed source or proprietary information sources. These would be private sources that you might have to sign up for with a particular vendor in order to get a feed of the latest threats and the details related to them. But there are also open source intelligence sources, otherwise called OSINT, O-S-I-N-T. These would be things like government reports. For example, in the United States, the National Security Agency, or the NSA, continuously publishes a lot of information about threats and how to protect against those impacts. There could be media reports, academic reports. Also, there are some freely available tools that provide us with lists of a lot of these threats online. Let's take a look at the Google Hacking Exploit Database. So here in the Google Hacking Database, we have an example of open source intelligence. It's available to anybody for free over the internet. Its focus is really on how to use the Google search engine itself as a way to receive information that probably shouldn't be disclosed, private information. So on the Google Hacking Database, let's say I were to scroll down to where we have this web user login in title. In title is a keyword you can search for in the Google search engine. That means I want to search for pages that were indexed by the Google crawler, where in the title bar of the web browser window, when that page is active, it would have web user login. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. We're going to open up a new web browser, and I'm going to paste that in here so we can actually do a little search on that. What we're going to get is a list of search results where there are web page logins. And if I click on any one of them to follow it through, it's going to bring up some kind of web page login, which means that that's one less thing that attackers have to figure out. From this point, they might run brute force attacks or something along those lines to try to break into this particular website. Of course, we never do that against sites that we don't have express written consent from the system owners to run those kind of attacks. Or it could be a site that you have under your control that you're using for testing. That would be okay. But don't try to break into things just because they show up in your Google search results. Now that's an example of open source intelligence. We also have closed or proprietary. That would mean that you might have to sign up with a subscription to some threat intelligence source before you can start receiving that information about those threats. The other thing to think about is there are other locations out on the internet that are also free, like GitHub. There are file and code repositories, again, where we have information related to threat intelligence. So you've got both open source and closed, free versus signing up with a subscription to gain access. We also have common vulnerabilities and exposures, or CVEs. So a CVE is a uniquely numbered threat that is known internationally, and this is freely available. So this is an example of OSINT again. The idea is we can become aware of threats, see how they work, and protect against them. So for example, if I were to search the CVE list, and I'm going to search it for something that was used in the Equifax hack of 2017, where more than 100 million customers' information related to credit information was stolen because of this. So I'm going to search for Apache Struts, which is really just a Java web development platform for website developers. But if I search for any CVEs, any known vulnerabilities related to that, we have a list here of many of them. And if I were to go down, for instance, down to 2017, specifically 2017-5638, this is the one that outlines that specific vulnerability that was actually exploited in the Equifax hack. So there's a lot of detail that we could learn about this, down to the point in some cases where you can actually get code samples at the programming level of how to create the exploit. So it's just another example of OSINT that is available to us. Then we get into other threat intelligence sources like the dark web. Sometimes people call that the dark net. It's called that because the content on it is not indexed by a search engine like Google. So you can't just search up for something that you want to display. Now, the dark net is really something that is used by what's called the Tor network. The Tor network is an overlay network that sits over the standard internet protocols that we know and love. And the idea is it anonymizes your origin location and also encrypts the connection. So the idea is that we can get to regular websites that are indexed, or some of the more nefarious bad websites on the dark web that are not indexed. Now, why is this relevant? How is that a threat intelligence source? It can be depending on who's using it and how they're using it. Think of journalists that need an anonymous and secured and protected way to send sensitive information perhaps to the media, or law enforcement, or government informants, that type of thing. So the way that the dark web works with the Tor network is that imagine that we've got the free Tor web browser program downloaded and we're going to a website. And let's say we're doing that from Canada. So what happens is our network traffic automatically goes to a Tor network entry point. So let's say again that's in Canada, my origin location. After which it goes through a whole bunch of other servers to try to mask where I'm really coming from. That's called the Tor relay network. These are servers all around the world that are designed for this purpose. And this is transparent. You don't have to do anything to make this happen. It just works. Eventually, you get to the Tor network exit point. Let's say in our case, it's Austria. And then finally, you get a connection to the website you wanted to connect to. Well, from that website's perspective, it looks like you came from Austria and not Canada. Let's take a look at the Tor browser for just a second to see what that looks and feels like when you're actually doing it. So after you've downloaded and installed the Tor browser, it's going to show up like any other app inside your Start menu in Windows. So I'm going to go ahead and start the Tor browser from my Start menu. That's going to connect me to the Tor network, after which I can then surf to a website of interest. So let's say I want to go to the Total Seminars website. So I just type in the URL if I know it, as I normally would. Now there are some search engines that are available in the Tor browser, but again, they can only show you what has been indexed. And so there are a lot of dark sites that are not indexed, and you can only get to them by plugging in an IP address or a DNS name. Okay, so we've made a connection to the Total Seminars webpage over the Tor network using the Tor web browser. Let's take a look by clicking the padlock in the upper left at the path that we took to arrive there. So from our browser, we went through Germany 3 times before we finally ended up at the Total Seminars website. So from the Total Seminars website perspective, such as with logging, this connection was initiated from Germany and not from where I really am in Canada. Now, while all those threat intelligence sources are fantastic, we have to go to them to learn about them. There must be some automated way that threat intelligence information can be shared among many different software programs and many different enterprises. And that's called Automated Indicator Sharing, or AIS. This uses a specialized format called the Structured Threat Information Expression, or STIX, S-T-I-X, format. It's a special format for packaging up threat intelligence information that is understood among many dissimilar systems. So the next thing is, how do we transmit that specially formatted threat intelligence information across a network? That uses the Trusted Automation Exchange of Intelligence Information, or TAXII standard, T-A-X-I-I. So this is built into a lot of security monitoring tools where you get up-to-date threat indicator feeds automatically without you having to go out and get it yourself. So we now know that we have a couple of different ways that we can get threat intelligence information both at the open source level and at the closed source level.